This video is made possible by Thunderbird Perch. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and share. Think about it. A new world awaits. Think in terms of space is an absolute if it is hard for us, even to begin to imagine what it would be like to exist in a realm in which space did not exist. Nonetheless, there is evidence that we are ultimately no more bound by space than we are by time. One powerful indication that this is so can be found in out-of-body phenomena experiences in which an individual's conscious awareness appears to detach itself from the physical body and travel to some other location. Out-of-body experiences, or OBEs, have been reported throughout history by individuals from all walks of life. Aldous Huxley, Gerda D.H., Lawrence August Stringberg, and Jack London all reported having OBS. They were known to the Egyptians, the North American Indians, the Chinese, the Greek philosophers, the medieval alchemists, the oceanic peoples, the Hindus, the Hebrews, and the Muslims. In a cross-cultural study of 44 non-Western societies, Dane Shields found that only 3 did not hold a belief in OBEs. In a similar study, anthropologist Erica Bourguignon looked at 488 world societies, or roughly 57% of all known societies, and found that 437 of them, were 89%, had at least some tradition regarding OBEs. Even today, studies indicate that OBEs are still widespread. The late Dr. Robert Monroe, a geologist at the University of Aberdeen and an amateur parapsychologist, investigated enough cases to film 9 books on the subject. In the 1960s, Celia Green, the director of the Institute of Psychophysical Research in Oxford, pulled 115 students at Southampton University and found that 19% admitted to having an OBE. When 380 Oxford students were similarly questioned, 34% answered in the affirmative. In a survey of 902 adults, Haraldson found that 8% had experienced being out of their bodies at least once in their life. And in 1980's survey conducted by Dr. Harvey Irwin at the University of New England in Australia revealed that 20 of 177 students had experienced an OBE when averaged. These figures indicate that roughly 1 out of every 5 people will have an OBE at some point in his or her life. Suggests the incidence may be closer to 1 in 10, but the fact remains OBEs are far more common than most people realize. The typical OBE is usually spontaneous and occurs most often during sleep, meditation, anesthesia, illness, and instances of traumatic pain, although they can occur under other circumstances as well. Suddenly, a person experiences the vivid sensation that his mind has separated from his body. Frequently, he finds himself floating over his body and discovers he can travel or fly to other locations. What is it like to find oneself free from the physical and staring down at one's own body? In a 1980 study of 339 cases of out-of-body travel, Dr. Glenn Gabbard of the Menninger Foundation in Topeka, Dr. Stuart Toenlow of the Topeka Veterans Administration Medical Center, and Dr. Fowler Jones of the University of Kansas Medical Center found that a whopping 85% described the experience as pleasant, and over half of them said it was joyful. I had a spontaneous OBE as a teenager, and after recovering from the shock of finding myself floating over my body and staring down at myself asleep in bed, I had an indescribably exhilarating time flying through walls and soaring over the treetops. Of my bodiless journey, I even stumbled across a library book. A neighbor had lost and was able to tell her where the book was located the next day. I described this experience in detail and beyond the quantum. It is of no small significance that Gabbard, Toenlow, and Jones also studied the psychological profile of OBEers and found that they were psychologically normal and were on the whole extremely well adjusted at the 1980 meeting of the American Psychiatric Association. They presented their conclusions and told their colleagues that reassurances that OBEs are common occurrences and referring the patient to books on the subject may be more therapeutic than psychiatric treatment. It even hinted that patients might gain more relief by talking to a yogi than convincing his actual accounts of such experiences. For example, Kimberly Clark, a hospital social worker in Seattle, Washington, did not take OB seriously until she encountered a coronary patient named Maria. Several days after being admitted to the hospital, Maria had a cardiac arrest, and it was quickly revived. Clark visited her later that afternoon, expecting to find her anxious over the fact that her heart had stopped as she had expected. Maria was agitated, but not for the reason she had anticipated. Maria told Clark that she had experienced something very strange after her heart had stopped. She suddenly found herself looking down from the ceiling and watching the doctors and the nurses working on her. Then something over the emergency room driveway distracted her. And as soon as she got herself, there she was there. Next, Maria thought her way up to the third floor of the building and found herself eyeball to shoelace with a tennis shoe. It was an old shoe, and she noticed that the little toe had worn a hole through the fabric. She also noticed several other details, such as the fact that the lace was stuck under the heel. After Maria finished her account, she begged Clark to please go to the ledge and see if there's a shoe there so that she could confirm whether her experience was real or not. Skeptical, but intrigued. Clark went outside and looked up at the ledge, but saw nothing. She went up to the third floor and began going in and out of patients' rooms, looking through windows. So narrow, she had to press her face against the glass just to see the ledge at all. Finally, she found a room where she pressed her face against the glass and looked down and saw the tennis shoe. Still, from her vantage point, she could not tell if the little toe had worn a place in the shoe or if any of the other details Maria had described were correct. It wasn't until she retrieved the shoe that she confirmed Maria's various observations. The only way she would have had such a perspective was if she had been floating right outside and at very close range to the tennis shoe, states Clark, who has since become a believer in OBEs. It was very concrete evidence for me. Experiencing an OBE during cardiac arrest is relatively common. So common that Michael B. Sabum, a cardiologist and professor of medicine at Emory University, and a staff physician at the Atlanta Veterans Administration Medical Center, got tired of hearing his patients recount such fantasies and decided to settle the matter once and for all. Save them. Selected two groups of patients, one composed of 32 seasoned cardiac patients who had reported OBS during their heart attacks, and one made up of 25 seasoned cardiac patients who had never experienced an OBE. Then interviewed the patients, asking the OBEs to describe their own resuscitation as they had witnessed it from the out-of-body state, and asking the non-experiencers to describe what they imagined must have transpired during their resuscitation. Experiencers 20 need major mistakes when they describe the resuscitations. 3 came correct, but general descriptions, and 2 had no idea at all what had taken place. Among the experiencers, 26 gave correct, but general descriptions 6 gave highly detailed and accurate descriptions of their own resuscitation, and 1 gave a blow-by-blow accounting so accurate to save them was stunned. Deeper into the phenomenon, like Clark, he has now become an ardent believer and lectures widely on the subject. There appears to be no plausible explanation for the accuracy of these observations involving the usual physical senses, he says. Body hypothesis simply seems to fit best with the data at hand. Although the OBEs experienced by such patients are spontaneous, some people have mastered the ability well enough to leave their body at will. One of the most famous of these individuals is a former radio and television executive named Robert Monroe. Had his first OBE in the late 1950s, he thought he was going crazy and immediately sought medical treatment. The doctors he consulted found nothing wrong, but he continued to have his strange experiences and continued to be greatly disturbed by them. After learning from a psychologist friend that Indian yogis reported leaving their bodies all the time, he began to accept his uninvited talent. I had 2 options, Monroe recalls. One was sedation for the rest of my life. The other was to learn something about this state so I could control it. Forward. Monroe began keeping a written journal of his experiences, carefully documenting everything he learned about the out-of-body state. He discovered he could pass through solid objects and travel great distances in the twinkling of an eye simply by thinking himself there. Other people were seldom aware of his presence, although the friends whom he traveled to see while in this second state quickly became believers when he accurately described their dress and activity at the time of his out-of-body visit. He was not alone in his pursuit and occasionally bumped into other disembodied travelers. As far. Here's cataloged his experiences and 2 fascinating books, Journeys Out of the Body and Far Journeys. OBEs have also been documented in the lab. In one experiment, parapsychologist Charles Tart was able to get a skilled OBE, Or he identifies only as Miss Z to identify correctly a 5-digit number written on a piece of paper that could only be reached if she were floating in the out-of-body state. The American Society for Psychical Research in New York Carlosos and psychologist Janet Lee Mitchell found several gifted subjects who are able to fly in from various locations around the country and correctly describe a wide range of target images, including objects placed on a table, colored geometric patterns placed on a free-floating shelf near the ceiling, and optical illusions that could only be seen when an observer appeared through a small window in a special device. Research Foundation in Durham, North Carolina, has even used animals to detect out-of-body visitations in one experiment. For instance, Morris found that a kitten belonging to a talented, out-of-body subject named Keith Harry consistently stopped meowing and started purring whenever Harari was invisibly present. Ease as a holographic phenomenon, considered as a whole, the evidence seems unequivocal, although we are taught that we think with our brains. This is not always true under the right circumstances. Our consciousness, the thinking, perceiving part of us, can detach from the physical body and exist just about anywhere it wants to. Current scientific understanding cannot account for this phenomenon, but it becomes much more tractable in terms of the holographic idea. Remember that in a holographic universe, location is itself an illusion, just as an image of an apple has no specific location on a piece of holographic film in a universe that is organized holographically. Things and objects also possess no definite location. Everything is ultimately non-local, including consciousness. Thus, although our consciousness appears to be localized in our heads under certain conditions, it can just as easily appear to be localized in the upper corner of the rim, hovering over a grassy lawn or floating eyeball to shoelace with a tennis shoe on the third. Useful analogy can once again be found in dreaming. Imagine that you were dreaming. You are attending a crowded art exhibit as you wander among the people and gaze at the artworks. Your consciousness appears to be localized in the head of the person you are in the dream. Is your consciousness really? A quick analysis will reveal that it is actually in everything in the dream in the other people attending the exhibit. The artworks, even in the very space of the dream and a dream location, is also an illusion. Because everything, people, objects, space, consciousness, and so on, is unfolding out of the deeper and more fundamental reality of the dreamer. Holographic feature of the OBE is the plasticity of the form a person assumes once they are out of the body. After detaching from the physical, OBEs sometimes find themselves in a ghost-like body that is an exact replica of their biological body. This caused some researchers in the past to postulate that human beings possess a phantom double, not unlike the doppelganger of literature, ever. Recent findings have exposed problems with this assumption, although some OBEs describe this phantom double as naked. Others find themselves in bodies that are fully clothed. The phantom double is not a permanent energy replica of the biological body, but is instead a kind of hologram that can assume many shapes. This notion is borne out by the fact the phantom doubles are not the only forms people find themselves in during OBEs. There are numerous reports where people have also perceived themselves as balls of light, shapeless clouds of energy, and even no discernible form at all. Person assumes during an OBE is a direct consequence of their beliefs and expectations. For example, in his 1961 book, The Mystical Life, mathematician J.H.M. Whiteman revealed that he experienced at least 2 OBEs a month during most of his adult life and reported over 2,000 such incidents. He also disclosed that he always felt like a woman trapped in a man's body and during separation. This sometimes resulted in his finding himself in female form. Whiteman experienced various other forms as well during his OBE adventures, including children's bodies, and concluded that beliefs, both conscious and unconscious, were the determining factors in the form of the second body assumed. Monroe agrees and asserts that it is our thought habits that create our OBE forms. Because we were so habituated to being in a body, we have a tendency to reproduce the same form in the OBE state. Similarly, he believes it is the discomfort most people feel when they are naked that causes OBEs to unconsciously sculpt clothing for themselves when they assume a human form. I suspect that one may modify the second body into whatever form is desired, says Monroe. What is Archer form, if any, when we are in the disembodied? Monroe has found that once we drop all such disguises, we are at heart, a vibrational pattern comprised of many interacting and resonating frequencies. His finding is also remarkably suggestive that something holographic is going on and offers further evidence that we, like all things in a holographic universe, are ultimately a frequency phenomenon which our mind converts into various holographic forms. Yeah, it also adds credence to Hunt's conclusion that our consciousness is contained, not in the brain, but in a plasmic holographic energy field that both permeates and surrounds the physical body. The form we assume while in the OB state is not the only thing that displays this holographic plasticity. Despite the accuracy of the observations made by talented OB travelers during their disembodied jobs, researchers have long been troubled by some of the glaring inaccuracies that crop up as well. For instance, the title of the Lost Library book I stumbled across during my home. OB looks bright green while I was in disembodied state. But after I was back in my physical body and returned to retrieve the book, I saw that the lettering was actually black. The literature is filled with accounts of similar. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, comment, and share. New videos weekly.